So welcome everyone to Cerna's presentation on how edge encryption might benefit your organization. My name is Tom O'Neill. I am the Security Practice Manager with Cerna. I've got quite a bit of experience in the security side, doing security operations implementations for ServiceNow since it came out last December. I've done about 10 plus implementations, more than any other partner. And we've got a lot of experience on different security products as well. Cerna Solutions provides consulting solutions and products focused solely on the ServiceNow platform. Our process and technical experts host a webinar such as this one every 1 to 2 months on topics like platform design, administration best practices, security, vulnerability, governance, risk and compliance, integrations, and custom integrations. Custom applications as well. So our presenter today is Jared Munt. He has multiple security certifications. He's been on the ServiceNow platform now for almost 4 years. He was the first ServiceNow partner selected to work within the edge encryption deployment and currently holds ServiceNow's highest level of accreditation for edge encryption. Prior to working on ServiceNow, he held a variety of positions in heavy security and government environments, including classified military intelligence systems. So let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick housekeeping note though, if you do have any questions during the presentation at all, please go ahead and put them into the panel on the right-hand side there, and we will answer those at the end. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jared.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And thanks for everyone attending who's carving out a little bit of their day to be here with us today. So some of the things we will talk about today and are some of the common reasons why an organization would choose to implement edge encryption, some of the options that we have for protecting your data. There is the usability versus security sliding scale, so we'll talk about some of the limitations that you may come up with while we are encrypting your data. Some of the technical requirements, so there is some on-premise hardware and software required to support this particular product. There is, again, with any sort of security implementation, we can manage, and there are features and integrations that you get to keep, but there are a few, again, limitations once this important critical data is encrypted. And a little bit about just Cerna and what we can offer as far as security solutions. So we'll start with the end in mind. We see here is a standard ServiceNow list view. We have a variety of columns being displayed, and after a properly designed, tested, and deployed edge encryption deployment, your users, everything should be transparent to your users. And 95% of the functionality as far as sorting and searching can also be retained. Now this is transparent to your users, but what is actually happening in the ServiceNow database behind the scenes looks a little bit like this. We see that the short description column is now replaced with an encrypted string. This is the only thing that is stored in the ServiceNow database. So later on in the presentation, anytime I mentioned the encrypted string or the garbled information, this is what I'm referring to. And this, again, is using industry standard AES 128-bit or 256-bit encryption. So it is, by all definitions, secure. Now, one thing to remember is that this product is less than a year old, and so there are some new features that will be added in future releases, but there are lots of value and lots of reasons to deploy it in its current state which is part of the Helsinki ServiceNow release. Now, there are a variety of reasons why companies choose to implement this. Could be for a regulatory compliance. The larger your company gets, the more regulatory and governance reasons there are to protect your data. Things like HIPAA and SOX, FedRAMP if you're a government agency using cloud services, if you have protected health information or personally identifiable information, that can add value to your processes, but we also want to make sure that that data is protected properly as well. Also, if you have just business critical data that is sensitive, it could be in response to a security incident, or it could be any number of product company secrets that aren't due to external regulatory reasons. That data needs to be stored somewhere to add value to your company, and so with Edge Encryption we can store that in ServiceNow. Data loss prevention, whether it's an internal insider threat or an external kind of accidental threat, we can, with Edge Encryption, reduce the attack surface of your data. One of the common use cases of deploying Edge Encryption is to allow only certain teams to access this encrypted data. And so, for example, an HR team or a security operations team would be utilizing this Edge Encryption system, and all other teams would access ServiceNow directly and would have no access to that encrypted data, which can mitigate and reduce that attack surface. One of the other ways or reasons to reduce the attack surface is for cybercrime. Now, to my knowledge, as long as I've worked on ServiceNow, there has been no breach due to a product vulnerability or a code or database problem. But if your organization is interested in mitigating a platform vulnerability before it happens, we can encrypt your data, and if there would happen to be an issue with the platform, all of your critical data would still remain in that encrypted format. And something that's come onto the scene in the last couple of years is something called data sovereignty. If your company is located in one location and your data is being hosted in a different jurisdiction, the laws of the data host apply to your data, and that can cause some issues with some sensitive data, and companies concerned about exposure to governments and other entities. So by encrypting your sensitive data, you can reduce or eliminate some of the hassles by just not having any of your sensitive data stored in the cloud, only storing that encrypted or garbled strings. So in all of these options, the message is just to reduce your critical data exposure, reduce the number of people with access to your data, reduce the number of servers storing your data, and reduce the number of parties or the number of companies that are responsible for handling your data. And we can do this on ServiceNow with a variety of options. Out of the box, there are a couple of encryption options, and there are a couple more that are available to add to your instance with some costs and some configurations. So the always on, always available option is the transport layer security, which is behind your HTTPS connection. And that provides the data in motion protection, as NIST would call it. This is available. This protects your data if you are on an airport or a coffee shop wireless connection that's unencrypted. And the ServiceNow support does have the keys to this, so they do have access. The next is a full disk encryption option. This is not turned on by default. It is available for an extra cost, and some other configuration considerations. It does provide the data at rest guideline as defined by NIST, and this protects against a physical breach. If someone would happen to steal a hard drive or steal a server out of the rack, that data would be unusable. And in certain governance requirements, this can be a good option for you. Next is field level encryption by using the encryption support plugin. This gives you the role-based access control, or RBAC, and is a good way to limit exposure of sensitive data. However, this encryption key is also stored in ServiceNow and can be accessed by ServiceNow support. And the next option, the newest option, is our edge encryption system. This system encrypts your configured, the selected critical data before it leaves your company's network. And so that gives us the benefit of data at rest, because it will never be stored in ServiceNow's database in an unencrypted format. It gives you that data in motion benefit by encrypting it before it goes into that encrypted TLS tunnel to the ServiceNow instance. It is designed and produced by ServiceNow. It's a native application that is tightly integrated into the ServiceNow platform, which gives you the benefit of retaining all of your services and support by ServiceNow's high support team, who is trained to debug and work through any potential issues you may have. And the important distinction with this option is that the data here cannot be read by ServiceNow support. ServiceNow support can see your configurations, and they can see which fields are encrypted, but they will never have access to that data. And there are some costs and on-premise hardware to consider for this option. Now, with proper design, we can use all of these tools to manage that usability versus security sliding scale to keep your data as secure as possible and also as usable as possible. Some of those limitations, which again, we recommend having as many conversations as early on as possible surrounding these so that we can mitigate them through our design of the implementation, as well as manage expectations surrounding these options. So anything using back-end business logic, back-end scripting like a business rule or automation like orchestration or workflows will only have access to the encrypted strings. Likewise, things that get emailed out or are generated on the back end, like a PDF or Excel spreadsheet that is scheduled to be emailed out once a week, will also only have access to that encrypted data. Now, online reports, like a dashboard or an online report where you can drill down, those are fully compatible with Edge and will have no issues seeing and reporting on encrypted data with those. Some of the limitations are, again, back-end items like the text search engine, search indexing, and email notifications, because they will only be able to see what's the encrypted strings in the database. So unlike most other ServiceNow products, Edge encryption has on-premise infrastructure requirements. And so the first consideration that I'd like to point out is that ServiceNow is an incredibly redundant, highly available system that we don't want to reduce by placing a single point of failure in front of it and kind of limiting the potential of your organization's availability and uptime. So we do recommend having 2 or more, depending on your data and infrastructure requirements, 2 or more load balanced proxy servers to maintain that highly available infrastructure. What we have here is the internal users or a remote user that has access to your company network via VPN would be able to access ServiceNow by going through these proxy servers that have the key. So the internal user would send a request to ServiceNow. ServiceNow would send back the page or the report or whatever that is being requested with that encrypted data in it, and the keys are held on that proxy server. So we have the proxy detecting encrypted data, swapping it out with the unencrypted format, and passing it along back to the internal user transparently. And so like in that earlier slide, the user sees exactly what they expect to see in a list view, a form, or a report. The types of keys that are held on this internal infrastructure on the proxy server are things like your encryption key, which can be a salted or unsalted AES 128 or 256. We have a signature, which ensures that nobody besides your company admins can modify your encryption rules, because each rule is signed by that RSA hash, as well as a TLS certificate, which allows all of your internal network traffic between your internal users and the proxy servers to be encrypted. So certain things, before we get too technical, there are a lot of considerations that we would go through, and I won't get too deep into them in this demonstration, but we'll have other infrastructure considerations like network load balanced encryption proxies, redundant or highly available order preserving databases, and then if your company has guidelines or policies on encryption key rotation, we can work that into this design with your AES 256 or AES 128 key rotations as well. So because this is infrastructure that is on-premise and managed by you, I do want to point out that the setting up and the monitoring and maintenance is the responsibility of you, of the clients, and not ServiceNow. Because there's so many different combinations of Windows servers and group policies and network load balance configurations. ServiceNow does provide some recommendations, but as far as the actual setting up and routine maintenance of those cannot be involved. We do have the most common config for deploying this would be to route all internal users through the proxy server. This is the easiest configuration because there's just a single configuration. All users access ServiceNow through the proxy. And this maintains all of your single sign-on and like I mentioned before, external users can VPN to access that internal. One of the other configuration would be having just some users, like an HR department, a SOC, or a product management team that needs secure business critical access, would access through a second URL and a second single sign-on configuration. And all other users, maybe like an external field services team that uses the mobile app to determine what's next on their workflow, they could still access that regular data directly through the instance. But that business critical encrypted data would remain only accessible for those particular teams through the encryption process. As far as key management is concerned, there is a process that we would discuss during a workshop to organize, define a name, and rotate those keys, as well as the pros and cons of using the same key across production and non-production depending on your data requirements for your organization. Also involved in a workshop for a more detailed discussion would be a network team. There would be some DNS records possibly required, as well as allowing of the proxies to access ServiceNow. Considerations for your internal workstations and the internal certificate authority, as well as the proxy servers itself. It can be run on a Windows or Linux. And again, we have uptime and availability considerations with network load balancers to discuss. Depending on your data, there is an optional MySQL database that can be used to add some additional features, as well as, and one of the most popular features that became available in the Helsinki release is called data tokenization, where even if it detects a sensitive piece of data, like a social security number, a credit card number, if you're in healthcare, there may be some standard formats of a it can detect certain types of strings even in a non-encrypted field, and it can proactively swap that out with a token. So again, no social security numbers would be stored in the ServiceNow database. These are things, some of the extra features that we can get with the not required but optional MySQL database, as well as discussing during that workshop the particulars of what will be encrypted and how we will encrypt it. So not everything in the application or not everything across the whole ServiceNow platform is eligible to be encrypted. And so we would talk about that with the application owner or the process owner to discuss which things should be encrypted and how we will encrypt them. So we see that string fields are eligible, and and if there's a self-service, self-reporting, self-updating type of requirements as well, we can utilize record producers in the service catalog to allow users to directly input those sensitive information. So after a workshop and after a kind of a design decisions are made, on that sliding scale of usability versus security, what we end up with is typically what you get to keep and what you get to lose or reduce in functionality. So things you get to keep are your integrations. So if you have an integration that requires access to this sensitive encrypted data, we can do that using a SOAP or a REST web service integration. If you have a mid server or multiple mid servers on your internal network for orchestration or other ServiceNow reasons, the mid server can communicate through the encryption proxy and access your instance. Once again, you get to keep the encryption keys in your hands, so there's no reason that ServiceNow would be able to get access to that encryption. The key alias, the key names, and the hash of the key is transmitted into the instance, but the actual private keys never are. Anytime we add extra items in the middle of a network path, there is a potential for some performance, but you get to keep almost all of that performance. It's a very minimal loss in performance. And this is most noticeable on a large attachment. So if you would choose in your application to encrypt all attachments using an AES 256-bit key, and you attached a 20 megabyte PDF file, that will be the place where you would notice the encryption the most. In a normal report or list view, it's not noticeable. You get to keep your support by the ServiceNow High support team. Again, they can see your configuration. They can see what fields are encrypted and which keys are used to encrypt those fields, but they cannot see your data. And you also get to keep your ServiceNow instance access outside of the proxy server. So again, if you had a field services or a remote team that's using a mobile app to access the instance, that functionality won't be reduced just because you have a different team like HR, security operations, that is using this particular encryption application. Now, some of the things that the functionality is reduced, again, mostly revolves around the back-end logic. So things like business rules, automation, exporting to Excel and PDF, notifications. And once an item is encrypted, you won't be able to access it or update it outside of the proxy by design. So that is a consideration. There are also a couple of minor user interface items that are reduced depending on the type of encryption as well. So fields that are encrypted will not be able to use searched by using the contains or starts with type of search features. So with that, I believe we are close to the QA section. So again, I'll check out some items that are in the questions. All right, I see one on the performance hit. I think I just covered that. Yes, there is a performance hit, but it is measured in milliseconds, not multiple noticeable seconds. And ServiceNow does have some benchmarking as far as average on a standard recommended hardware, and it does measure less than 10% in the single digits, sometimes double digits of milliseconds. That is the type of thing that we would cover in a future webinar that does more of a technical review of how this stuff works behind the scenes. Let's see. All right. Looks like we have some other questions coming in. Thank you for that. We have a question on, can I use one set of proxy servers for multiple instances? Like, can I use one encryption proxy for dev and test and QA? In order to remain supportable by ServiceNow, there must be one proxy server per instance. So there's of course, technically there'd be some ways to hack it and run multiple instances on a single piece of hardware, but in order to remain supportable, there must be one encryption proxy per instance. The database, however, that optional MySQL database, can host multiple instances on that. All right, here's a database question. Thanks for sending these in. I'll try to get through as many of them as I can during this time. Does the optional database need to be MySQL, MS SQL? Again, in order to be supported for the version 2.0, the Helsinki release, MySQL is the only supported database. It's an open source. There's no cost associated with that, but that is the only source, that is the only database option as of the Helsinki release. Will we lose our existing business rules? It's a big drawback. So no, there's no blanket losing of rules. The only limitation within a business rule to access encrypted data would be if the business rule, for example, maybe in change management, how you could have it automatically open up an outage. If certain values were going to be copied from the change into the outage, the business rule would not be able to copy an encrypted string over into the outage. So it's limited. All other business rules would continue to run on that encrypted record. I see a couple of questions in here regarding cost. I don't have specific numbers, and so I won't comment on that today. That's something that in the next slide we'll have our contact information on our website that our account specialists, our pricing type of people could get you more accurate numbers. So I don't have any specific dollar figures at this time. And the proxy. So yes, here's a follow-on to multiple proxies for multiple instances. So let's say we had Cerna prod.service-now.com, Cerna test, and Cerna dev as our 3 instances. There are multiple, I guess I'll start off by saying that there are a variety of ways to manage this within your company's network. And modern enterprise networks have a lot of options as far as DNS and routing and things like that. So this definitely will not be the only option, but one option would be to create a DNS record on your internal DNS for cernaprod.service-now.com and point that to the ServiceNow, to the proxy. And so anytime any internal clients, this is one of the simpler ways of doing it. It would point at the proxy through, and then when the laptop or device was not on a VPN or not on the company network, it would resolve using external DNS and would access the instance directly. That's about as technical as I'd like to get for this audience today. But yes, there's routing options, there's DNS options, and the general recommendation is to use whatever your infrastructure team is most qualified to support and is most comfortable supporting regarding load balancing and the various highly available options. I see a couple of questions. I will finish up here with the last couple of questions that have been submitted regarding government security compliance, military organizations, and UK and other government security compliance. So yes, I didn't get out all of the various alphabet soup as far as NIST numbers and various governance numbers as part of this introduction to edge encryption. But there are specific NIST guidelines and other guidelines that these things correlate to, as far as using an AES 128-bit key, using an AES 256-bit key. It differs for all the various governance, so I tried to keep it generic today, but yes, there are options. Specifically for the UK, I'm not sure. As the roadmap for other, but in general, being able to show and provide that the encryption keys, that your encrypted data never leaves your organization, is a strong value. So that looks like that is most of the questions that have been submitted. I definitely appreciate the questions and helping to add value that way. If you had the question, I'm sure other people had the question too, so thank you for everyone who attended and submitted the questions. Like Tom mentioned at the top, this is the kind of thing that we are doing every month or so. So whether we are in the, whether we're talking to you as part of one of our solutions, whether it's a security, edge encryption, or otherwise, through any phase of the deployment, please feel free to just reach out to us with additional questions, with a recommendation or request for a future demo such as today. Or if you just have general platform questions, feel free to reach out and check our website for future demos as well.